The pickup truck growled as it turned onto the dirt road covered in mottled brown mud. The entire town of Marrow Creek seemed to be asleep, even though it was only mid-afternoon. On the old tin roofs, the wind rustled softly, cold and dry-like. A whisper in the ear of a soldier accustomed to hearing orders. Caleb Munro stopped the truck in front of his parents' old house. The wooden house perched precariously on the edge of the pine forest. The paint on the walls faded, the windows so dim it was as if they hadn't been cleaned for a decade. He didn't get out right away, sitting in the car for a long time, looking. Through the windshield, his eyes met his own reflection, a gaunt face, eyes without depth, and dark circles under his eyes stretching out like the shadows of dreams that refused to dissipate. Bran was sitting in the back seat. He raised his head when Caleb opened the car door, without waiting for a command, without whining. He just followed, step by step, steadily but slowly, as if each step was considering whether or not to turn back. The wooden door creaked softly as Caleb pushed it open. A thin layer of dust covered the wooden floor. Light from the window slanted down through the old, worn curtains, creating gray streaks of light. The damp, musty smell of old wood mixed with something older, maybe time, or the loneliness that had never been named. Caleb placed the old military suitcase on the floor. Its sound echoed, concise, heavy and dry, a sound familiar to any soldier. The sound of returning. Bran didn't go round sniffing. He walked into the living room and lay down on the threadbare rug in front of the unlit fireplace. No need to examine. No need to get acquainted. He knew this place well, or at least, he knew this was where Caleb needed to stay. Caleb sat down in the woodman chair by the window, taking off his cracked military boots. Outside, the sky was apathetically gray. It hadn't snowed yet, but it was so cold that the skin didn't dare stretch out for too long. The towering pine branches across the road didn't move. Everything stood still. Like a forgotten stage, he sat like that for hours, without turning on the lights, without turning on the radio, without touching the phone. Time was no longer measured in minutes, but by Bran's breathing, by the creaking of the wooden floor every time he changed his sitting position, by the dense silence that crept into his chest like silent cigarette smoke. In the evening, Caleb made coffee. He didn't add sugar. He didn't add milk. Black as the sky over Afghanistan that he had left 17 months ago, but never really left. At night, he lay on the old wooden bed, the thick blanket as heavy as an invisible armor. Bran lay at the foot of the bed, in the same old position, where he used to lie in the army camp, where he used to stay awake every night when Caleb was drugged or exhausted after patrol. At first, sleep came slowly, then suddenly pulled him down like a hand from the past, and every time he closed his eyes, familiar images reappeared. The sound of gunfire, the smell of burning flesh, stifled screams. Ramirez's face, Vika's arm, the child's backpack exploding within sight, all like a fragmented film, an ordered, illogical, but with the weight of real blood and real human breath. Caleb woke up with a start, gasping for air. Sweat soaked his back. His hand grabbed at the air as if searching for the gun that had been taken away during his last discharge. Bran didn't bark, didn't rush forward. He just raised his head, walked slowly towards him, then laid his head on Caleb's knee, right where his right knee had been hit by shrapnel 8 years ago. Just a light touch, no urging, no comforting, like a touch of habit, of deep understanding. Without words, Caleb exhaled. His back slumped. The nightmare didn't disappear immediately, but his heart gradually steadied, and his hand gradually relaxed. Bran retreated, Lay down. Eyes still open. Not sleeping. He didn't sleep until he was sure that Caleb had returned. He stroked Bran's back gently, whispering, "I'm okay, Bran. It's just not used to it yet." Neither of the two survivors believed that statement, but they kept silent, because that was the only thing that could keep them alive, together, in the house with nothing left, in a town with no one familiar, after a war that was no longer allowed to be mentioned. The next day at noon, the sky was still overcast. The light was not enough to be called sunlight, nor cold enough for snow to fall. Caleb finished his third cup of coffee, his eyes sliding across the window pane, looking out at the front yard full of unswept dry leaves. Bran lay near the door, head resting on the wooden chair leg. He had started walking slower, one of his hind legs dragged slightly each time he stood up. The fur on his muzzle had turned as white as ashes. Caleb saw it, even though he didn't say it. And today, he decided to take him to the vet in town, to get some pain relief for his joints, and a few packs of special food for older dogs. The town of Marrow Creek was as quiet at noon as it always was. A few old men sat in front of the shop, occasionally glancing at Caleb's pickup truck as if they had just seen a familiar shadow but couldn't remember the name. None of them had ever been to war, and none of them knew what to say to someone who had returned from it. The store Harlan's Market had only a few customers. The pale white fluorescent lights shone down on the rows of shelves as regular as rows of tombstones, a suffocating feeling from the moment he walked in. The smell of floor cleaner mixed with the scent of laundry detergent, the sound of shopping cart wheels creaking. Light country music played through the speakers, monotonous, distant. Caleb walked slowly, his hand on Bran's neck like an invisible leash. He felt every step, every fleeting glance, and the inexplicable fatigue from his chest. He was looking at the pet medicine shelf when it happened. A child in the corner of the counter dropped a canvas. Odor. The sound broke out. Pop. Sharp, dry, and quick. Similar enough to a pressure mine on the battlefield. Caleb collapsed as if pulled by an invisible jerk. His body convulsed. His eyes widened. His hand reached towards his hip, where the M9 used to be. He mumbled, incoherently, "Get out of the way. Mine. Don't step." No one understood what was happening. The mother screamed, pulling her. Child behind the shelf. An old man stepped back, his hand reaching for his phone. The music was still playing monotonously, strangely out of place. Bran stood still. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just stepped forward, placing himself between Caleb and the rest of the world. No one dared to approach. No one except one person, Riley Thorne, the cashier at the checkout counter. Didn't scream, didn't call the police. She walked forward, slowly, until she was only a few steps away from Caleb. Caleb. Her voice was as deep and even as the midday wind. "You are home, in Marrow Creek. There are no traps, no mines." Caleb was still motionless. His eyes didn't seem to see her, but to see through her, into a piece of memory that had never closed. Bran raised his head, not moving violently, just looking straight at him. The dark brown eyes that had witnessed so many deaths now contained only one thing, waiting, and then, very slowly, Caleb exhaled, like someone who had just come up for air. He sat down heavily, leaning his back against the shelf, his arms hanging limply. No one said anything. No one approached. Riley knelt down next to him, keeping a sufficient distance. She said softly, I know that feeling. No one understands, except someone who has been through it." Bran came closer, his head touching Caleb's shoulder. He leaned slightly, resting his forehead on Bran's short fur, not crying, not moaning, but his eyes gradually softened, like clouds that had just shed their moisture. After that, everything was resolved quietly. No police, no newspapers. Riley told everyone that it was an anxiety reaction of a veteran, then helped Caleb stand up, leading him to the car, Bran following closely behind. On the way home, Caleb didn't say anything. The cold wind blew through the crack in the car window. Carrying the smell of damp wood and imminent snow, Bran lay in the back seat, eyes still open, watching Dot when the car arrived home. Caleb sat in the car for a few more minutes. He looked in the rearview mirror. His eyes, though still gloomy, had something small added. Caleb realized that he no longer startled every time someone stepped onto the wooden porch. Not because he had returned to normal, but because he had become accustomed to someone coming without asking anything. Since that afternoon at the supermarket, Riley hadn't called or texted. 3 days later, she simply showed up. A large paper bag in her hand, slow footsteps, without hesitation but also without rushing. Caleb was sitting on the porch, sharpening the back of an old knife. Not to use, just a habit of someone who had been in the battlefield, always keeping his hands busy so that his mind didn't drift to where he didn't want to go. Riley handed him the bag without explaining. Inside were some homemade cookies, a bag of dog food, and a small packet of joint supplements. Exactly the kind that the vet had prescribed for Bran. Caleb just looked, nodded, didn't say thank you, but in his eyes there was something softening, like a taut rope starting to slacken. Riley didn't ask to come inside. She sat down on the remaining wooden chair, far enough away not to intrude, but close enough not to be considered a stranger. Bran came out of the house, unbidden. He lay down between them, his head resting on Riley's leg, his eyes still looking ahead as if guarding against a memory about to resurface. They sat silently. For a long time, coffee was made, placed in their hands, but no one drank. Silence enforced. No need to fill the void. It wasn't awkward silence, but a kind of tacit understanding, only happening between people who had lived so close to death that they no longer felt the need to speak. The times that followed were the same. Riley dropped by, sometimes bringing a book, sometimes a loaf of hot bread. Sometimes she didn't bring anything, just sat, finishing reading a chapter she had left off. Caleb gradually learned how to let others be present without feeling guilty, and Bran, like an invisible god, always lay between them, not as a dog, but as a boundary that no one intentionally crossed. One afternoon, when Caleb was cleaning Bran's old collar, Riley stepped forward and placed a leather-bound notebook in front of him. She wasn't verbose, just one sentence. "When you're ready, write. No need to tell anyone. Just write for yourself." Caleb took the notebook. The feel of real leather under his fingers made him pause. His wrist had been injured, and was still difficult to move when the weather changed. But the most difficult thing was not writing, but thinking about having to dig up everything inside. That night, after Riley left, he placed the notebook on the table, not opening it, just leaving it there. Like a challenge, Bran lay beside him, eyes closed, but his breathing still even. Caleb finished his cold cup of coffee, his hand resting on the leather cover. He didn't know why, but he opened it. The first page was blank. He didn't know what to write. What story was worth telling? Every memory was like a scar. No one saw it, but touching it hurt. Caleb picked up a pen. His hand trembled slightly. He wrote, slowly, Bran. Just one word. No description, no explanation. But when he looked up, he saw that Bran had gotten up some time ago, sitting in front of him, those eyes, old, deep, understanding, seemed to be looking straight at him, not judging, not demanding, just waiting. He smiled faintly, very small, very tired, but it was the first smile in a long time. You always start first. Don't you? Bran didn't answer. He just laid down, his head touching Caleb's leg. Like the first night at FOB base outside Helmand, where bombs fell more often than words, Caleb closed the notebook. He didn't need to write anything more that night. Just being able to write one word meant he had started. The following month, Bran began to walk much slower, each time he stood up. One of his hind legs dragged slightly, trembling. His breathing was heavy at night, and the soft moans when it was cold startled Caleb in the middle of the night. He didn't say it, but he knew Bran was enduring so as not to worry him. One morning, Caleb took Bran to the town's veterinary clinic. Dr. Alden was a thin man, round 50, living alone on the edge of the forest, and had served in the rescue force with a canine unit. He didn't ask too much, just bent down, gently stroking Bran's spine, then stopping for a long time at the hip joint. The joint is almost completely worn out, he said, his eyes not leaving Bran. He's still fighting, but you have to understand. What he's doing is for you. Caleb stiffened. I know. Bran has lived long enough to care for others. Now it's your turn to take care of him. Caleb gripped the strap of the bag on his hip tightly. He still gets up when I have nightmares. Still stops me when I lose control. He's still fighting. Doctor Alden didn't refute. He just placed his hand on Bran's back, a gentle stroke, full of understanding. Then looked at Caleb with eyes that didn't pity. Just shared the understanding between two people who had lost more than they had left to keep. But the war is over, Caleb. Riley took Caleb to a veteran support group in Rivermouth, the town, across the pine forest, more than an hour's drive from Marrow Creek. At first he didn't want to go, but she didn't force him. She just texted. Not to heal, just to feel less alone. The community room was a wooden house, red tile floor, wooden chairs ranged in a circle. More people came than Caleb had imagined. Some sat quietly, some looked down at the floor, some laughed, telling stories that sounded like jokes but everyone knew weren't. No one asked him how many people he had killed. No one touched the scar on his wrist or the way his eyes went silent every time someone knocked loudly on the door. They just waited. Like Riley waited for him to say the first thing, Bran lay at his feet, his head resting on his boots, his eyes open. He didn't move, didn't blink, as if guarding Caleb's dreams even when he was awake, for the first time in years. Caleb didn't feel like an oddity. That feeling was so light that it made his heart want to cry. That afternoon, on the way home, Caleb and Riley stopped at a roadside gas station. The shop was small, old. Only one evening shift employee, a boy around 16, sitting behind the counter reading comics. Caleb took Bran inside to get some water. Riley went round back to buy medicine from the vending machine. The atmosphere was quiet. Only the sound of the wind passing through the cracks in the corrugated iron roof and the wind chimes hanging on the porch dinkling out of rhythm. Suddenly, there was a crash from the back. A man, holding a fruit knife, came out of the bathroom, behind the counter, staggering, smelling strongly of alcohol. "Give me some cash, quick." The clerk looked up. Panicked, the man moved closer, his voice louder. "Hurry up. Don't make me do something stupid." Caleb didn't think. The old instincts immediately returned. He gently pulled Bran's leash, whispering, "Hold steady." He didn't yell, didn't rush in, just walked forward slowly. His voice was deep, even as if talking to himself. "No one needs to die here." "Put the knife down." The man startled. His hand trembled, slightly. He didn't want to kill anyone. That was clear. But the fear in the clerk's eyes could make him lose control at any moment. Bran stepped up, not growling, not barking, just stood between Caleb and the man. His head was low. His eyes locked on the target, exactly like those nights in the base when the guards fell asleep and only he was awake. The man looked at Bran. His hand began to droop. He took a step back. I just need money." "I don't." "I know," Caleb said, slowly taking out his wallet, placing a few bills on the counter. "Ticket, then leave." Bran didn't move until he had disappeared from the shop door. The clerk slumped into his chair, his face pale. Riley had just returned, her eyes bewildered. Caleb didn't say anything. He bent down, placing his hand on Bran's back, his hand shaking, but not from fear, but from realizing he could still stand firm, without a gun, without yelling, just having faith. "Good boy, old friend." Bran looked up, not smiling, not wagging his tail, but those eyes, once again, made Caleb understand that, even though the war was over, they could still fight for other things. That night, when he got home, Caleb sat down to write more in the old notebook. His hand trembled less than before. He no longer wrote just one word, but wrote a whole paragraph. "Bran, today you saved someone again. No one was hurt. No blood needed. I thought only war could make you useful, but it turns out you know more than that." Bran slept more in the late spring days. He no longer followed Caleb out to the porch every morning as before. Just lay quietly in the corner of the house, where the old rug was spread by the fireplace. That had been unlit since March. His breathing slowed down. His eyes closed more than they opened. But every time Caleb passed by, he still raised his head slightly, not to probe, but just to let him know that he was still there. Caleb no longer counted each day. He learned to live in each morning, make coffee, feed Bran, take him for a few laps round the yard, even if it was just slow, short steps like an unnamed ritual dot at the Veteran Support Center. Caleb began working as a therapy dog trainer, not as a tactical trainer, but as someone who knew how to teach a dog to listen to human emotions. He didn't use a loud voice, didn't use whips or whistles, just eyes, silences, and infinite patience. Once, a young dog kept growling at a veteran who had lost a leg, refusing to come close. Caleb didn't say anything. He sat down, placed his hand on the dog's back, and whispered, "No one here needs to pretend anymore." Then that dog walked over, his head low. That veteran cried. One May morning, it was foggy. Caleb placed his hand on Bran's neck. The fur had thinned, his heart beat weakly, but steadily. Bran didn't open his eyes, just lay still, his head resting on Caleb's leg. Like so many nights before, Caleb touched the old collar. The leather had cracked, Bran's name had faded. He didn't replace it, because it was the last thing that had remained unchanged from the battlefield until now. He bent down, whispering, "I've learned how to breathe, Bran. You don't need to hold on anymore." Bran exhaled, along. Light breath like the wind passing through the pine canopy. No convulsions, no crying, just a breath, then silence. Caleb sat motionless, not wiping away tears, not lamenting. He placed his hand on Bran's back, holding it there for a long time, as if wanting to retain the last of the warmth, not to hold on, but to send off. He buried Bran behind the house, where two old pine trees reached up silently. He didn't erect a tombstone, just placed his food bowl and old collar on the ground. Covered with a layer of soft grass, Riley stood beside him, lightly holding his hand, not saying anything. A necessary dot in the evening, Caleb sat on the porch, again, alone. The wind blew softly, the smell of young pine and damp earth lingering in the air. The light from inside the house shone out, casting his long shadow on the ground. He took out his notebook, turned to the last page, and wrote a line. "I'm home, thanks to you," then closed the notebook, not crying, just exhaling. A light, very light breath a few weeks later at the training ground. A young dog kept shrinking back, unwilling to approach. The veteran in a wheelchair, Caleb walked over, sat down beside him, not speaking, just patted it gently on the back. His eyes didn't command, just remained silent. The dog slowly stepped up, his head low, and lay down beside the veteran. The man reached out, gently touching the soft fur. "Thank you," he whispered, unclear whether he was speaking to Caleb or the dog. Caleb watched, his eyes softening on his wrist. The new keychain was engraved with a small line. Bran, the last friend of war, the first friend of peace. And when the wind blew through the row of pines outside the yard, people said there was something like the sound of footsteps running across the dirt. Light, fast, but no longer hurried. No longer afraid.